I can think of no better way to begin than by addressing the flyer put out by Hillel. I don't recall a similar flyer against Louis Farrakhan put out by any black group on campus. I can't imagine a flyer against any Arab speaker put out by any Arab group, because the blacks and Arabs are normal, because the blacks and Arabs have self-respect, and Hillel is an abysmal example of a soul of slavery that is a product of 1,800 years of exile. They should be ashamed of themselves. But I want to address what they said, because I think it's important for you to understand that while they refused to come here today in forum, in debate, and the reason why they are not here is not because they don't want to dignify me, because they know that they can't handle me. So I want to deal with their written word. They speak of my history of violent actions in the United States and in Israel. Let's understand what the connotation of violence and violent acts that I've done really means, especially in light of the recent visit of Mandela to this country, in which he refused to repudiate violence, stating that if a people that has no weapons is up against a government that has weapons, then violence is the only way. That's what Mandela said to the ringing cheers, not only of blacks, but every Jewish liberal. Because we all know that violence is good when it is used in South Africa, or in El Salvador, or in Nicaragua. What kind of violence are they talking about that they condemn that Meir Kahane used in this country? 22 years ago, when the Jewish Defense League began the battle for Soviet Jewry, when Hillel never even knew that there was a question of Russian Jews, of course we used violence. For 50 years, half a century, the Soviet Jews were in their Soviet prison and crying out. And who did anything for them? Hillel? The B'nai B'rith? The ADL? Mort? We went out into the streets and we did the only thing possible to capture the headlines of news media and to let the world know that there is a problem called Soviet Jewry. Of course we use violence. Of course I bombed Russian buildings. Of course I did. And let every single Jew who cheers the African National Congress for using violence condemn me. What makes a Jewish freedom bomb? What makes a Jewish freedom bomb any less worthy than an African freedom bomb? When Stokely Carmichael, that vicious Jew hater, appears here and he applauds violence and every black applauds him, why don't Jews get up and tell Hillel, if you didn't do anything for Russian Jews, at least have the decency not to condemn those that did? Of course I used violence and went to prison for it here for a year for Russian Jews. It was worth every day that I spent there when I now see Russian Jews coming in every day to Israel. Of course it was worth it. Hillel should be ashamed of itself for speaking against violence for people who were trapped in that prison when American Jews refused to do anything for them. And the refusal of the Jewish establishment to do anything for Russian Jews for half a century was part of an ongoing process. I'm sick and tired of hearing Jews complaining about what the Christian world didn't do for Jews during the Holocaust. I'm sick and tired of hearing Jews condemning the Vatican and the British and Roosevelt. I never condemn the Christian world for not doing for Jews, because I don't expect anything more from them. That's not the real lesson of the Holocaust. The real villain of the Holocaust wasn't the Christian world, it was the Jewish establishment that knew that a Holocaust was taking place as early as 1942 and did nothing. I know temple rabbis who in the 1960s were arrested for breaking the law in Selma, Alabama, and Jackson, Mississippi. For who? For blacks. That's nice. What was the issue there? Civil rights. But when the issue in 1942 and 43 wasn't civil rights, but Jewish lives, and 12,000 Jews died every single day, was there one temple rabbi that ever got arrested? When the Jews of Hitler's Europe pleaded with them and begged them, shake the world for a very practical answer, the Jews were brought to Auschwitz and to all the other camps, not by some magic carpet. They were brought there by freight trains, railroad cars. And every day 12,000 Jews arrived and 12,000 Jews left through the chimneys. And the Jews begged American Jewry, shake the world and demand that Roosevelt bomb the railroad lines, and put them out of commission, and bomb the bridges over which those lines run. And every day you saved 12,000 lives. Did they shake the world? They didn't do anything. The same Jews who in 1963 went to Washington for Martin Luther King's dream, they didn't go to Washington in 1942, in 1943. If the Jewish leaders, including Mort, most people here don't know who Mort is, believe me, you're missing nothing. If all the Jewish leaders, the American Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee, the B'nai Hillel, would have led 100,000 Jews to Washington in 1943, and there at the White House sat on Pennsylvania Avenue, blocking traffic, and shouting forth, "Hell no, we won't go," which is a famous Jewish slogan, and saying, "Bomb Auschwitz, bomb Auschwitz, bomb Auschwitz," what would have happened? Two things would have happened. One, they would have been arrested, which, believe me, is no sweat. In and out, that's no problem. But more important, the next day, every single newspaper in the free world would have had headlines saying Jewish leaders arrested, demand bombing of death camps, and they would have been bombed and Jews would have been saved. You know why they didn't do it? For the same reason that the Jewish leaders in this city now are terrified of Meir Kahane. What will the Gentiles say? And will this cause anti-Semitism? That's what bothers them. And the sacrificial lambs were 6 million Jews, because they were afraid of anti-Semitism in this country. History of violent actions. I'm proud of every single violent action I did for my people, and I'm ashamed of Jews who sit here and do nothing and condemn Jews who did something. His violent behavior and hateful ideas contravene the basic values of Judaism. I want to tell you something, that the Jewish leaders of the Twin Cities would not know a Jewish value if they tripped over one. These ignoramuses. Who becomes a Jewish leader in Minneapolis, in St. Paul? You think a scholar? Someone who's wise in Judaism, scholarship? Of course not. Jewish leaders in these Twin Cities and in all the cities of this country are chosen for one reason only: their money, their money, their money, and their ability to raise money. That's who your Jewish leaders are. Jewish values. What do they know about Judaism? You have temple rabbis in this city whose only mazel, whose only luck is that their congregants know less about Judaism than they do. You want to hear what Judaism says about violence? I'll read to you with sources what Judaism says about violence. I would ask any local rabbi here what that means, but I'm afraid that most don't speak Hebrew. So I'll translate for you. If one comes to slay you, slay him first. That's in the Talmud in Brachot. Meir Kahane didn't make that up. That's in the Talmud that Mort's great-grandparents once studied. There was a Jew named Pinchas, Phineas, to all the Baptists sitting here. And Pinchas, in a moment of zealotry, went out and killed a Jew and non-Jew for various reasons, which I'm not going to go into. And now it isn't necessary. You can check it out in the book of Numbers, chapter 24 and 25. And the rabbis say the following, that he who sheds the blood of the wicked, kol hashofech damo shel rishayim, ki'ilu hikriv korban. One who sheds the blood of the wicked, it is as if he has brought a sacrifice to God. I didn't write that. That's in the Talmud. Now you can burn one's local Talmud. I don't care about that. But don't babble about Jewish values when you would know one, if you saw one. In the Bible it says in Dvarim, Deuteronomy chapter 20, when you go to war against your enemies. And the rabbis ask, why is it necessary to add the words against your enemies? Obviously one doesn't go to war against his friends. And they answer, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Almighty said, Bo alehim koivim, go against them as enemies. Kishem shenam rachamim alechem, just as they don't have mercy upon you, kach atem lo terachamu alehem, don't have mercy upon them. So much for the poor Palestinians. I didn't say this, and I didn't write this. That's in the Talmud. That is Judaism. If Hillel, in its ignorance, does not like this, they can hand out leaflets against the Talmud too. But not against Meir Kahane. Either be consistent or shut your mouth. On Sunday, 3 Jews were murdered in Jerusalem. I didn't hear the UN condemn the Arabs for murdering those Jews. I waited and 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 nothing. Nothing. I didn't hear the New Jewish Agenda condemn them. I didn't hear Peace Now condemn them. But when the Arabs on the Temple Mount, our Temple Mount, the site of King Solomon's temple, and the second temple, long before there was Islam, when thousands of Arabs, for 15 minutes, threw stones, heavy stones, it was only God's miracle that no one was killed there. And then they attacked the police station and burned it down. You hear that? It's very important that every single Jew, listen to that. You see? What they're screaming is, Allah is great. That was what the fellow who murdered the 3 Jews did. temporary... I'm fine. Temporary intrusion. All right. It's always a pleasure to see Arabs in Minnesota. And I want to tell you something. With God's help, we're going to give you a lot of your cousins to come here too. Let's get back to the speech. Temporary intrusion. Very, very temporary. This speech continues. All right. Now, not only dumb, but ugly, too. All right. Bear in mind that when they clapped, they were clapping for the murder of 3 Jews. So every Jew who is sitting here and who is against Kahane, understand they're not against Kahane. They're against Zionism. They're against the Jewish state. And every Arab who is honest, and most of them are honest, will admit it. Now, it's not going to help you. Clearly, the level of, academics at this college has reached a new high. The fact is, I have the microphone, and I can outshout them at any time. Let's continue. Let us continue now. People will have a chance to speak or curse at the proper time. The truth of the matter is, the Intifada did not begin 3 years ago. The Intifada began 70 years ago in 1920, when Jews were murdered by Arabs in Jerusalem, that they don't call Jerusalem, they call Al-Quds. You know why it began in 1920? Because the Arabs knew that Zionism's purpose was to create a Jewish state. And so, they're against a Jewish state. They're not against a Jewish state within the 1967 boundaries. Because if that's all that bothered them, the 1967 boundaries, how come there was no peace in 1966? In 1947, the UN proposed a partition plan to create 2 states, Jewish, Arab. Guess who said no? Guess who said no? You have 20 chances to guess who said no. The Arabs said no, and they went to war. They could have had not only what they call the West Bank, but they could have had Western Galilee. They could have had Jaffa. They could have had Ramleh. They could have had Lida. They could have had Nahariya. They could have had Ashdod and Ashkelon and Beersheba. They said no. You know why? Because they wanted everything. So they went to war, and they lost. And they lost. And then they went to war in 1967 again, and they lost. And they're in a rut. And they're in a rut because, fellas, if you would ever be so dumb as to try a war again, this time Jordan belongs to us too. Isn't it great for about time to hear a Jewish speaker speak who isn't a wimp? Oh, what a pleasure. Now, they don't want the occupied. Everybody talks now about there are Arab moderates. The latest concept, Arab moderates. There are even moderate terrorists today, moderate terrorists, who murder Jews moderately. So people say, see, Hussein of Jordan is a moderate. Of course, no question about it. In 1967, King Hussein had Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, and he went to war. It doesn't take more than a freshman scholar to realize that if someone has East Jerusalem and he goes to war, maybe he wants West Jerusalem. maybe. And West Tel Aviv and West Haifa. There's not one Arab standing here who won't tell you that Jaffa is Arab too. Right? Right. There's not one Arab that won't tell you that Tel Aviv is Arab too, and that Haifa is Arab too, and that the Galilee is Arab. Of course, that's what they believe. So don't fall into this stupid trap. If Israel would only give up the lands which the Arabs already had in 1967, then there would be peace. They don't want peace. They want to wipe out Israel, and they will never do that. It belongs to us and not to them, period. Sit down. You'll get your turn right now. I speak. This is not the Knesset, fella. One person speaks here at a time. You will sit down. I speak and not you, so shut up. Now, so therefore, so don't believe the Palestinians. Just ignore him. Ignore him. I'm speaking now. I have the microphone, and I can be heard, and he can't. Now, so therefore, understand that they murdered Jews in the 1920s, and they murdered Jews in the 1930s, and they murdered Jews in the 1940s, and there was no occupied land in 1967. And therefore, I tell you, with a heavy heart, I who want peace, I want peace much, much more than any Jew living in Minneapolis, because I don't live here, I live there, and my two sons serve in the army there, and I want peace more than anyone there, and therefore with a heavy heart I say, there will not be peace, because they don't want peace, and Zionism did not come into being for peace. Zionism came into being for a Jewish state. Hopefully with peace, but peace or no peace, a Jewish state, and you can eat your heart out. Now, the answer is that there is no Arab problem. There's a Jewish problem. There's a Jewish problem. Jews suffer from a specific form of AIDS, a specific form of Jewish AIDS. It's called guilt. No one feels guiltier more than Jews do. We have honed it to a fine art. We feel guilty about surviving. We feel guilty about living. We feel guilty about having a Jewish state that persecutes the poor Palestinians who only tried to wipe us out for 70 years. So therefore, let me tell you something. It is better to win than to lose. For 2,000 years, we were losers. Today, we are winners. It is so much better to be a winner. It is better to live than to die. The world has loved us for 2,000 years because we died. It is better to live than to die, and it's better to have an Israel that is hated by the whole world than an Auschwitz that is loved by it. And know that, and understand that. Now, this poor fellow here, this poor fellow is frustrated. You know why? Because he is an Arab. He isn't. Just get over there, fella. All right. It is unbelievable. He says, I am not Arab, I'm Jew. If you're Jewish, I'm a Swede. Now, in any case, his frustration is that in 2.5 weeks, I go back home to Israel, and they have to stay here in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so, therefore, understand, no guilt, no guilt. For 1,800 years, we had no state. For 1,800 years, we enjoyed such wonderful benefits as pogroms and crusades and Auschwitzes, and never again. Never, never again. Now, the other thing that I want to speak about, see, not Meir, every Jew listen carefully, not Meir Kahane's racism, Zionism's racism. Every Hillel member here who had the lack of self-respect to hand this out, knowing that Arabs are going to be here, no, they're not against me. They're against every Zionist, and they're against the Jewish state, and you should be ashamed of yourself because I understand Arabs, and they understand me, and neither of us can understand you. And so, because I do it so well. Now, the second thing that I've come to this country to speak about, and especially to young people, to young Jews, is the incredible liar. I didn't come here. It's an incredible liar. I tell you something. If you didn't come here, I would have to invent you to come here for me. It's just a pleasure. I was born here, and I know America, and I think that this country here, for the Jewish people, has been the greatest country outside of Israel in Jewish history. But, that which was is not always that which will be. I have never, ever seen the level and the virulence of anti-Semitism in this country since World War II. When Stokely Carmichael came here and said what he said, he could have never said that 20 years ago. He came here and he was cheered by black students and by leftist students. And the president of this school didn't have the decency to come out with a firm condemnation of it and understand what that means. Now, I don't cry about anti-Semitism. I'm not a crier. I say if there are anti-Semites, you kick butt. That is the Jewish way. That is the Jewish way. I don't cry about it. I don't cry about it. There should be formed a JDL here. And when you hear people insult Jews and Judaism, give it back to them 7 times for every single statement. Of course, of course. Our problem is that Jews want to be loved. They want to love. I don't want to be loved. I want respect. And you don't get respect unless you have self-respect. I want to be loved by these here people. Who cares about them? But I want to tell you one thing. Among the guilt trips that Jews have is a fear of calling blacks anti-Semites. If Farrakhan would be white, well, the B'nai B'rith would have been breathing fire. The American Jewish Congress would have been congressing. The ADL would have been ADLing. But if you're black, you can say it. Now, I believe that all people are really equal. And what does equal mean? Equal for good and for bad. If he's good, he's good. If he's white or black. And if he's bad, he's bad. If he's white or black. And Farrakhan is bad. And Jesse Jackson is bad. And Toure Carmichael is bad. Racist. You see that? It is programmed in them. It is programmed. Racist, race. The fact of the matter is, eat your heart out. I'm speaking. Now. So understand, I remember Sabra Shatil. It was a great, great day. Now. Boom, boom, boom. What was Sabra Shatil? Christian Arabs, 30,000 Arabs. Boom. You should live so long as that there should be a Palestine. When they say Sabra and Shatila, bear in mind, what happened at Sabra and Shatila? Christian Arabs murdered Muslim Arabs. Wasn't that Jews murdered them? It's all right. They can hear me over there. There's no way that I stop for these yo-yos. When people say that Jews and Arabs should live together in coexistence, bear in mind what happened at Sabra and Shatila. It was Christian Arabs that murdered Muslim Arabs. When they speak of coexistence between Jews and Arabs, the fact is that in Lebanon, Arabs can't live together with other Arabs. Sunni Muslims and Shiites and Druze and Christians and Amal and Hezbollah, everybody kills everybody else. But of course, we'll live with them because we have so much in common. There won't be coexistence. Not because we don't want it, but because they never wanted it, and they won't want it. And so no one thing There will never be a Palestine. There will only be the land of Israel. Now, this is so pathetic. I would imagine that when I came here, there would have been at least 1,000 people to demonstrate me. I feel embarrassed that there are only about 30 people here. I feel embarrassed. What has happened to my name and my fame? Is that the best that you can do? Is that the best that you can do? All right, back to the wars. When you go back, the Hitler students here will go back, or other people will go back, and they'll say, Kahane said that it could happen here too. Your rabbis or your Jewish leaders will say Kahane is paranoid. Well, first of all, know one thing. Paranoid Jews live longer. That's the first thing. That's the first thing. Secondly, I'm not paranoid. The Jews of Germany were as convinced in the 1920s that it could never happen there. Find a Jew who lived in Germany then, prior to Hitler, and ask him, how did Jews live there? And he'll tell you, what do you know about the good life? And what do you know about how we love Germany with a passion? There was even a Jewish foreign minister in Germany in 1922. There wasn't a Jewish Secretary of State in this country till 1972. And that's only because he fled Germany. They loved Germany. They didn't even call themselves Jews. They called themselves Germans of the Mosaic persuasion. It couldn't have happened there. That was the land of culture, Kultur. And it happened there. It didn't happen there because Germans are different. Germans are not different. That's racism. Germans like all other people. What happened there, that there was a terrible economic collapse. Terrible, terrible. And people lost not only their money, they lost their hope. And when someone loses hope, he'll follow anyone, any sickness, even Arafat. Let's go. It's like pushing a button. Come on. Like Pavlov's dog, you know, and they salivate. Now, here we go. The fact of the matter is, come on, I have the greatest one-liner since Henny Youngman. Come on, face it, come on. The fact of the matter is, it happened there. And people were desperate and people followed a person who said, I'll give you hope and I'll give you a future, and that's what happened in Germany. You want to tell me that could not happen here? You want to tell me that could not happen here? Of course it could happen here. Your Jewish leaders, where do they sit around dinners and banquets of the National Conference of Christians and Jews? That's not where one is going to hear what people really think about Jews. Over there they sit and exchange jokes and compliments and plaques. Your plaque, my plaque, 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 plaque. That's not where you hear it. There's one place to hear what people really think about Jews. That's in a bar. Not a trendy bar, a neighborhood bar. When the schnapps goes in, that's where you hear what comes out. The Jews run the country, the Jews own this, the Jews. And that's when times are good. The jealousy, the envy, the hatred. If there should be an economic collapse in this country, and believe me that is not a far-fetched thing, you know, I would pay you to come. I would pay you to come. You're so incredibly great for me. Yeah. You make me look so great. A banking system that is on the verge of collapse. Loans that will never, ever be paid. An FDIC that hasn't got more than 60 cents on every single $100 to cover the deposits that you think are insured. A national debt of $3 trillion. No sweat, $3 trillion. If the Japanese weren't buying up America, who would cover the national debt? That's what this country faces. So I plead with every single Jew to think carefully about what could be here, and to think about what the ultimate answer is. And the ultimate answer is, go home, come home. We have a state of our own. Come home. We don't need money. We need Jews. We need... Yeah, Ella not from New York, from Brooklyn. There's a tremendous difference. Obviously, you're not from Brooklyn. My great-grandfather came from Israel. His name was Abraham. And his son was named Isaac. And his son was named Jacob. I didn't come to Israel. I came back to Israel. Before you can even talk about Jewish pride, understand what Jewishness is. What is Jewishness? Why be Jewish? Why is Mort a Jew? Why shouldn't we be human beings? Human beings. Why be a Jew? Why be so parochial? What do we have that other peoples don't have? Blood, same blood. Skin, same skin. There are black Jews, white Jews, green Jews. Yeah. That famous Jewish head. If I had a dollar for every dumb Jew I met, I wouldn't be rich, but I'd be comfortable. There are smart Jews and dumb Jews and smart Gentiles and dumb ones. That's nothing special with the Jewish people. There's one thing that we have that no one else has, and that's the reason to be a Jew. The one thing that we have that no one else has is a Torah. A Torah given at Sinai, when Sinai was not a hospital, but a mountain. And we Jews took that magnificent heritage and we threw it away. For what? For the suburbs? For the right to be equal? You can be equal and be Jewish. So you young people, this summer, take off from school. Take off from school. Go to Israel. And enroll in a yeshiva. Any yeshiva. If you don't like it, quit. If you like it, stay. And don't come back. Write to your parents and say, listen, I've come home, I'm staying. Not gonna make them happy, but it's not the first time they haven't made them happy, but this time for something good. And stay there. Who says every Jew has to have a BA? Who says that every Jew has to be doctor, lawyer, CPA, or marry one? Where? What did it say that? You can learn to work with your hands. You can learn to plant a tree on a Jewish settlement in Judea and Samaria, which belongs to us and not to them. Pavlov, quiet. Even they're impressed. And get married and have a dozen babies. We owe Hitler 2.5 million babies. Let's pay him back with interest. Everyone a gem, everyone a diamond. And then 30 years from now, when you're sitting in your settlement, which is now a town, our town, and you talk to your children and your grandchildren in Hebrew, and you tell them how it was when you first began, and they look up at you, and in Hebrew they say, Eze Sava, what a grandfather, Eze Safta, what a grandmother, then you know what being Jewish is. Then you know what Jewish pride is. Forget them. They're dandruff. We just brush them off. They're not relevant. You're relevant. The country is ours. It will never go under. Don't be afraid of Saddam. Don't be afraid of Arafat. They're nothing. I'm a little worried about leftist Jews, but they're also nothing. Come home. Come home. Come home. And I want to finish with a Dvar Torah as a rabbi. The Talmud tells us that when God wanted to give the Torah to the Jewish people, so all the highest mountains, the loftiest mountains, all came, and each one said, give me the honor. I want the honor. Give it on my peak. And God said, no, I have a small mountain. It's called Sinai. And I'm giving it on that small mountain to teach the Jew a lesson, to be humble. Small mountain, humble. Now, that's a nice lesson, right? Goes over well with Hillel. Now, the Ger Rebbe, a great, great scholar and also smart, the Ger Rebbe asked an obvious question, which I'm sure some of the clever ones here have already thought of. He said, if God wanted to teach the Jew to be humble, why didn't he give the Torah in a valley? You don't get lower. That's about the lowest, the most humble that one can get. Good question, right? Come on, fellas. Honestly, good question. And the answer he gave was, God wanted to teach the Jews 2 lessons. 1, be humble. 2, don't be too humble. We Jews aren't valleys. Nobody steps on us. Those days are gone forever. We're mountains. We're not arrogant mountains, but we are mountains. And know that. And know that. And I hope that this afternoon, there were Jewish students that had never heard me speak before and only knew from Mort, never read a book of mine, never heard me speak, and yet said, Kahane is a Hitler. I hope you've heard me speak. And I hope that at least you've now listened and you can think, you know, maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something there. So now when we go into these questions from this panel, and afterwards I'll take all the questions. In fact, the first questions will be only from my friends here. And if you ask me any question which I haven't heard, I'll swim back to Israel. The questions, first of all, from the panel and then from the audience.
Before, turn this on.
No, from the panel, sir. And then you.
Well, this isn't.
No, just sit quietly. I mean, life is not easy. Life is not easy.
Well, all right. Before I ask my question, I'd just like to make a quick comment. There's a saying, I don't know if I'm going to get it exactly right, that let an ignorant man hang himself with his own rope. And I came here not too sympathetic to Kahane, and I wanted to see the violent Kahane. I wanted to see the racist Kahane. And all I saw was the violent Palestinians. And if you want to be an activist, that's great. If you want to make yourself seen, that's great. Okay, excuse me, pro-Palestinian. If you want to be an activist, if you want to make yourself seen and heard, that's fine. But if you want to, well, you never convince me, but if you want to convince these people out here, I think you failed in that sense. I didn't hear any violence from him. I would have loved to have heard. I mean, all I've heard recordings. Okay. That's all I have to. Now I'll ask my question.
Why not just ask the question and don't know?
Fortunately, I had heard recordings of you before, and I have heard you say some pretty nasty stuff. Yeah. I'm not a St. Paul rabbi, which probably endears me in your eyes, but I am Jewish, and one of the things that does connect you and me, is our Judaism and the Torah. So I would like, if the audience would bear with me, to read 2 parts of the Torah, just maybe to get some perspective, and then I'll ask my question. Everyone knows the famous Sodom and Gomorrah story. Okay. Abraham came forward and said, "Will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there should be 50 innocent within the city? Will you then wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent 50 who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly?" And the Lord answered, "If I find within the city of Sodom 50 innocent ones, I will forgive the whole place for their sake." Abraham spoke up, saying, "Hence I venture to speak, my Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. What if the 50 innocent should lack 5? Will you destroy the whole city for want of the 5? And he answered, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." But he spoke to him again and said, "What if 40 should be found there?" And he answered, "I will not do it for the sake of the 40. And he said, "Let not my Lord be angry if I go on, but what if 30 innocent should be found there?" And he answered, "I will not do it if I found 30 there." So on and so on, until God eventually says 10, then he would destroy the city. That's from Genesis 18, verse 16. And the shorter passage I wanted to read was from Exodus 22:20. "You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not ill-treat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, I will heed their outcry as soon as they cry out to me. And my anger shall blaze forth, and I will put you to the sword, and your own wives shall become widows, and your children orphans." Now, I guess you can see what I'm getting at here. To me, those 2 passages means the rejection of collective guilt, or punishing innocent along with the guilty, and the importance of compassion towards other human beings. Now, you probably know better than me, but from my understanding, never in Jewish history have these two values been applied selectively, meaning it governs Jewish behavior towards Jews as well as Jewish behavior towards non-Jews. And my question then to you is a lot of the things that you've said, for instance, all the Arabs in Lebanon are not worth the life of one Jew, and calling upon saying that a Jewish state cannot exist with a democratic state in the long run. To me, as a Jew, that contradicts the essence of Jewish justice, of the sense of Jewish justice, and contradicts basically the only thing that binds you and me, the Torah.
Okay. First of all, it's quite true, Arna Rabbi. Whether collective punishment is a Jewish concept or not, in the Torah, after the Torah was given to the Jewish people, might be seen in the concept of a people called Amalek. You've heard of them. Since my Bible is not in English, I'll have to do a kind of a rough kind of a translation. This is from the same Torah that you read. Vaya, aniach Hashem lakecha, mikol oivecha misaviv. And when the Almighty shall give you rest from all your enemies about you, timche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim. You shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. And King Saul was commanded in Samuel, the book of Samuel, 1, chapter 15, to wipe them out totally. Now, I'm sure that not every single one of those people was what you call bad, right? And yet, there it was. Because the Edomites and the Egyptians and the Moabites and the Ammonites did not treat the Jews properly. In the Torah, it says that the Ammonites and the Moabites will never be allowed to marry into the Kahal Hashem, the assembly of the Lord. There is collective punishment in Judaism. And I put it to you that in World War II, when Allied bombers bombed German cities, who do you think that they were killing in those cities, the Allied bombers? Generals? SS troops? Or were they killing German men, women, and children in order to bring that war, hopefully, one day closer, 1 week closer, 1 month closer to its end, so that innocent people, really innocent people, might be saved? Had you lived in World War II, I hope to God that you would have not demonstrated against the bombing of innocent women and children in Germany. I hope to God, though I have grave, grave doubts. Now, the question about who is a good Arab, bad Arab, you have a very, very serious problem. To you, a good Arab is one who recognizes Israel and who will allow the Jews to live in Israel. That's not a good Arab. That's a quisling Arab. A good Arab is like a good Jew. A good Jew is one who says, the land belongs to us. A good Arab is one who says the land belongs to him. I respect the Arabs. Can't understand you. There is not one Arab in the world who a minute before he murdered a Jew was not considered as not a bad Arab. On the day that you can prove to me how you can pick out the ones who are going to kill Jews and not, then I'll have a little more moral feeling for you. But in the meantime, when my wife has to go on a bus and my children and my grandchildren into the marketplace, and I'm not sure when a bomb is going to go off, put there by an Arab who until that moment was a good Arab, in your mind, since there's no collective punishment. It's not your wife. It's not your children. So don't be so moral at my expense. Secondly, the thing that you brought down about the stranger. First of all, let's use the Hebrew word, ger. It doesn't mean stranger. The rabbis tell us 48 times. When it says ger, it means a convert to Judaism. That's what ger means, not a stranger. Oh, certainly. I'm certainly making a great difference between a non-Jew who wants to live in Israel and one who wants to take that country from me. If any non-Jew wants to live inside Israel, of course he should be treated properly, and of course well. But if you're talking about people who say it's our country and Jews are thieves and someday Israel will become Palestine, see? If you only knew how I would pay for you to come with me, what would I do if you weren't here? Did you hear that? Now quote me again that let's treat the stranger properly so that he can take your country from you. And so therefore, that answers your question.
Well,
next one.
I'm sorry, just quickly follow up for a second. I wasn't thinking, I mean, for instance, when the bomb blew up in Jerusalem,
yes.
Excuse me, on the beach, that basically ended the dialogue between the United States and the PLO for the time being.
For the time being.
Right. Jews roamed through the streets.
Right.
And just, threw rocks at cars.
Right.
Totally randomly.
Right.
I'm not talking about, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but still it seems to me that despite these outbursts here, that in many cases there are innocent Arabs, ones who have lived in Israel since 1948, own businesses, vote Likud at times. And to me, to punish them for the action of a terrorist, I think does contradict this. And I think a medium, we don't have to go totally out of control. I mean, I believe that Israel should be protected. I'm not sure whether or not we should give the occupied territories back. I don't know. I'll reserve judgment. But I don't believe that, on the other hand, we should go so far as to just say, well, an Arab blew up this bomb, and an Arab's over there, so I'm gonna beat the.
In a certain sense, I think, that you're right. But what is your answer to a frustrated and bitter and frightened people that sees this happening every single week, and the government is either incapable or unwilling to take steps? What are they supposed to do? How easy it is for you to sit here in an atmosphere of a college, university, a campus, and talk about it's not right. I agree with you. Can't you begin to grasp how they feel? Secondly, if I would ever be Prime Minister of Israel, not one Arab would ever be killed because they wouldn't be there. And I would rather move them out and have them live with their own people than kill them every single day. What is more moral? What is more moral? Tell me. Having the army shoot them every single day because they throw rocks and firebombs at soldiers? Is that more moral, or is it more moral to have an exchange of populations? We took in 800,000 Sephardic Jews from Arab countries, and now let's finish it by giving them the Arabs from the Jewish country. I think that that is a moral issue and a moral answer, and if you don't think so, it's not enough to say, well, I don't think so. You had better give a better answer, because if you tell me, well, I have no answer, that is no answer to me and my wife and my children and 3.5 million Jews living inside Israel. Yes. Next. Okay.
As you know, majority of Jews still are not religious in Israel, and there are still liberal Jews who are not support your ideas. So if you gain the power, how it will affect and impact the lives of those Jews and liberals?
Sorry, again?
The majority of Jews in Israel still are not religious, and there are still liberal Jews who are not support your ideas. If you gain the power, how this will affect and impact their lives?
Most of my votes in 1984, when I won a seat in Parliament, did not come from religious Jews. We were the only party based upon Torah which ever in the history of Israel received 80% of its votes from non-observant Jews. I'm speaking about issues which have nothing to do with whether one is an observant Jew or not. I'm speaking about survival. You think that when I'm cheered in Sephardic neighborhoods, it's because of my yarmulke? It's because I say things that they understand. Why do Sephardic Jews back me in such great degree? Because they come from Arab countries and they lived under Arabs and they fled those Arabs and they never again want to live with them. I come here to Minneapolis and I find myself in the Middle West. Fine. Well, the Middle West is not the Middle East. Get that clear. In the Middle East, you don't solve problems over coffee and cake. Here, any problem arises, let's sit down, let's talk it over, coffee and cake, compromise, come out and we'll finish. You say that, we can work it out. The Middle East is a different mindset, a different culture. There is no compromise. There's a difference. So now, certainly the majority of Jews inside Israel are not observant Jews. That has no relevance to the issue which I raise. There are many, many of them who will support me until we move the Arabs out, and then afterwards won't support me, which is sad, but it's the way it is. In the meantime, support me. Support me. Yes?
There are many people in Israel, Eric Sharon, one of them, who believes that if the United States thinks it can dictate policy to Israel, they can keep their money, that Israel should be weaned off of non-military aid anyway from the United States. If we follow your path of expelling Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza, the issue will become not the withdrawal of help, meaning the United States, okay, we're not going to help you anymore, but the inflicting of pain by the international community. If the EC can consider sanctions now, when I feel Israel is relatively blameless, what's going to happen if your program is implemented? And finally, I'd just like to point out that I think it's taken as a given that no country can withstand international sanctions, economic sanctions from the world community if they are united. Not South Africa, not Iraq, not Israel. And in that way, I feel that your positions are putting Israel on a collision course with the country that I was born in and the country that I love, and I don't want to see that happen.
I have news for you. You're on that collision course right now without Meir Kahane.
Excuse me?
You're on that collision course right now without Meir Kahane. As soon as that Gulf crisis ends, guess who's next on the agenda for George Bush's New World Order? If you're happy about George Bush, and I am happy about him taking a stand against Saddam in Kuwait, then bear in mind that all the Arab states that are backing Bush are telling him now, after this is over, the next step is the occupied territories. You're on collision course now, fella. You're on collision course, and you have a problem. You have a problem. But it's not me who is your problem. Wait. Or as they say, shwai shwai, right? Shwai shwai. It may indeed be that they'll cut off aid to us. Let me tell you, first of all, in our platform, we have a major plank in which we call for the ending of American aid to Israel. I don't want American aid. We become a junkie. Every single year we get our annual fix, and what happens is we are dependent on it, and when America says no, we say no. They says boo, it's boo. I want to be an independent state, and I'll eat tomatoes once a week to be that independent state. I don't want them to send flowers to my grave to show how much they love me. The fact is that if Israel would become a free enterprise country, if they would dismantle the bureaucrats and socialism and the pkidim, or the clerks, and they allowed people to invest in Israel and make a lot of money, you would get billions of dollars of private money coming into Israel every single year. But they don't. I know wealthy Jews in this country and wealthy non-Jews who want to make money and who would love to invest in Israel and not Singapore. But in Singapore, They welcome you. Come on in, whatever you want. Main thing is build us a factory. In Israel, you go through the 7 circles of Jewish hell. You need a permit, the license to get the permit, and then they ask you, and how much do we get out of it? He's putting the money. Give him 20 years tax-free. Let him build a factory first and give jobs to us and export and hard currency. Let him do it. We Jews have made every country rich in which we've lived except Israel. Well, so don't worry about American aid. I don't want it. I want us to be treated on an equal level, not like some serf. I don't want the aid. I want Jews to earn their own way. I want Jews to learn to work hard again. I don't want Arabs building my houses. I want Jews building the houses, collecting garbage, paving the roads. That's what Zionism was always meant to be, to make us normal. And secondly, finally, as a rabbi, I must speak to you. Once upon a time, we Jews believed in the burning bush, right? Why did you exchange the burning bush for George Bush? Where is your faith that the Jewish people, if it does the right thing and has faith and, of course, a powerful army, if it does what he wants, he'll do what we want. Have faith. If we Jews hadn't had faith for 2,000 years, we'd have long since converted. Have faith. We are winners. Wait, just a second.
Go ahead.
Okay, one more question here, and then, no, 2 and 2, and then afterwards.
No,
yeah.
go ahead.
Go on.
Finish.
Okay.
I don't cop out on questions. Believe me. Go on. Go on.
You said that non-Jews who live in Israel should not live as citizens, but permanent residents. So what is your opinion about non-Jews in Israel, such as Bedouins and Druze? What is your opinion about non-Jews in Israel, such as Druze and Bedouins, who serve in the army and participate in the Jewish life, social life in Israel? What will be their status after you gain the power?
I believe that any non-Jew who recognizes the Jewish state can live there with his personal rights equal to that of all Jews, but no national rights. I believe that the Jewish state was set up for the Jewish people. I didn't say that. The Declaration of Independence of Israel declares, "Anu machuzim bezot al hakamat medina Yehudit." We hereby proclaim the establishment of a Jewish state. A Jewish state? What if Jerry Fowler would say, "I want a Christian state"? Well, you have a problem. Sometimes Western democracy and Zionism are not exactly equal. And that's what makes people upset at Meir Kahane, because I say painful truths. Any non-Jew, including Arabs, who are ready to live in Israel with their personal status equal to that of Jews may do so, but no national rights. The state of Israel was created for the Jewish people, and anyone who becomes Jewish has absolute rights. Any convert is as Jewish as Meir Kahane is. It isn't a racist concept, it's a religious concept. And it was always so. It was always so. So that's the question. That's my answer. Yes, sir.
The United States is
I'm not
the
agree
first
with you.
and greatest democracy throughout modern civilization. And one of the pillars of this democracy is the separation of church and
Right.
state. Now, where do you get the slightest idea that you can create a religious state and hope to get by in any reasonable fashion? And why the United States is in bed with a religious state is beyond me. This is the beginnings of our problem. What the hell? There's no difference between the United States becoming a religious state or jumping in bed with them. The Israelis are leading us down the primrose pathway because we have denied and rejected the principle of separation of church and state. Therein lies the problem. Religion and state does not work.
I want to know how come America jumps into bed with Arabia, which doesn't exactly separate church and state.
They have those kind of defense mechanisms. We're not giving that kind of...
Excuse me, sir. Sir. Listen. Wait a second. You spoke, and I was quiet because I'm basically polite. And also moderate. Now, if you haven't finished, finish, and then tell me that's it, and then I'll speak, okay? Go on, finish. Okay, finish. Good. Why did we jump into bed with Kuwait long before this incident happened? Did anyone ever tell you that Great Britain doesn't separate church and state? Well, if they haven't, he just did. Sweden doesn't separate church and state. Norway doesn't separate church and state. America is an exception in the Western world. Most states do not separate church and state, including Canada. So where do you come off telling me, where do I get off telling you?
Trying to say that Sweden or Canada have the same kind of religious arrangement as Israel does.
I did not say that, but you have now raised the... No, you're right. Israel has a different one. But you raised, first of all, the issue of separation of church and state, which I've dealt with. Now we come to Israel. The Jewish people, by definition, are both a religion and a nation. When a non-Jew wants to become Jewish, he isn't given some papers at some ministry. He goes to a rabbi and he converts through a process of Judaism, religion. In the Bible, it states, you're an Am Kadosh, a holy people. So we are a people, a nation, and yet at the same time, a holy people. A religio nation, if you will. So by definition of what the Jew is, that is what his state is. And Islam has precisely the same concept. Christianity may have it, in many, many cases doesn't have it. Protestantism, for the most part, doesn't have it. The Catholic Church, for a long, long, long time, never and ever separated church and state until Martin Luther came and forced them to ease up. Judaism, long before there was Protestantism, there was Judaism. And long before there was Islam, there was Judaism. And throughout the ancient world, there was never separation of any kind. If you were an Edomite, you lived in the land of Edom. If you were a Moabite, you lived in Moab. If you were a Philistine, you lived in the land of the Philistines. And no non-Edomite was a citizen of Edom. And that was the way things were until 300 to 400 years ago. Now, you may think that the American way is better, which is, I mean, fine, good. Sir, don't go to Israel, okay? Then don't go to Israel. Stay here.
I don't want to send my money there either.
Well, then don't. We may survive. It'll be hard. It'll be hard. But we may survive. Sir, if you don't want to give us that, then we won't allow the 6th Fleet to use the Haifa Naval Base. Oh, really? You would be amazed how much they want it, and you'd be amazed how much it would cost, how much the Haifa Naval Base would cost this country if it was in Greece or the Philippines or Spain. So if you, sir, fine, sir, you are an American and you have an absolute right and obligation to do what is best for America. I agree with you fully, that's exactly right. No argument here. No argument. You see, we agree. I'm going to do what's best for my country. All right? And that's the way it is. Okay, good. That's it. You see that? Now that is an intellectual debate. Forget about it. I don't want the money. I don't want it. We have a platform. We don't want it. We don't want it. Give it to Arabia. Okay. Yes, sir.
Rabbi, can I greet you in the name of Elohim and maybe pose one question?
Even two, because you're a nice guy.
Rabbi, when I read the Old Testament and I don't have proficiency in Hebrew, little Greek, little Chinese, but there is the notion in the Old Testament throughout the Pentateuch and throughout the major prophets and throughout the minor prophets, all the way from Zechariah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Abraham, that Elohim, that Yahweh, El Shaddai, is married unto Israel, the apple of his eye, his chosen people. And that as God draws back the chosen people from the othermost parts of the world, whether it be Egypt or the four corners of the globe, he seems to do it. One, we know that there have always been wars and thoughts of wars, But secondly, he woos them back. In other words, we have the notion that the hand of God is with the Jewish people. But also we have the notion of the arm of the flesh. And it doesn't seem to me that God, when he's actually wooing back Israel, uses quite so much of the arm of the flesh, but woos them, even woos them perhaps through conscience or through other issues of ultimacy. Saul of Tarsus pointed out, the hand of God is with me, so I can go forth. Could you please clarify in my mind this notion of the arm of the flesh, which at times seems to countervail the notion of the wooing of Elohim?
Sir, I don't know which Bible you're reading. But I can tell you that throughout my Bible, it says, Eitz lemilchama ve'et leshalom, which means there is a time for war and a time for peace. There's a time to love and a time to hate. If in World War II we had not hated the Germans enough, we would have lost the war with all the consequences. You think that we should have perhaps wooed the Germans? Or maybe the arm of flesh was the way to do it. Hopefully, if your wife or your loved one is ever attacked, I hope you won't pray to God to woo the enemy away. Had we had a Jewish state in 1936 and 37, 6 million Jews wouldn't have died. And had we not used the hand in 1948, there would be no Jewish state today. Judaism has a basic concept. Faith in God, trust in God, but you don't just leave it to him, you have to do too. And when you do everything in your power, then he woos you. That's the Jewish way. Yes, next. Ah, finally. Okay.
Well, I want to make a comment first, and that's against the people running this panel and the police department of the University of Minnesota. I don't know why they allow the person like him to assault everybody, all the audience. 90% of them call them Pavlov dog, or he told me to shut up or whatever, and you arrest one person because he was against him. And he was peacefully standing there. You just handcuff him and take him away. I want you to release him. That's the first thing. And I think that's the first comment. And I'm happy to be here because it was excellent to see how the racist people defend themselves. And through all the speech you give to us, I still wonder in the way you talk about the nation of the Jew or the race of the Jew and how you want to handle or how you want to run your ideal state. What's different between your idea and the fascist idea, or worse one, let's put it, since you came from, well, actually you're not from Middle East, but you claim you are from that. Anyhow, since I'm from there, there is one thing we have in common. We both came from the birth of all religions. And that's the problem right now is existing in Middle East. If you want to run your state based off the religious, what's the definition, or what's the difference between you and, in other hand, Hitler on the base of the fascists, or Khomeini on base of the Islam? Why are you not thinking about all the human is equal and they have a right to live next to each other regardless of their belief or religious?
First of all,
and one more comment. Well, I'm from Iran.
From where?
Iran.
And Jewish, right?
Yes, I born in the Jewish family, but I don't consider myself as a religious person.
Right.
I'm from the country, the great Cyrus, if you remember, during the ancient time, released all the Jew. I mean, and I kind of amazed why you right away when I opposed to the way you're talking, you said, you Arab. Well, yes, right now I said I'm Arab. What's the make different? I'm just questioning you in terms of the way you're talking to people. You're assaulting everybody. It does. If I was blonde or blue eye, you going to change your behavior?
That's it?
Yeah.
But that's it, right?
Well, did you got my question?
Is that all?
Did you got my question?
I got all your questions. Is that all?
Okay. Yeah.
Good. Concerning the arrest, I'll put in a good word for the poor kid. But it was a pleasure to see him arrested. Now, why can't Jews live side by side with Arabs? That's your really basic question after that long speech. That's exactly what I want. I want to move the Arabs out of my country and let them live in their country called Jordan, and I'll live side by side with them.
That's not
That's
my question.
exactly what I want.
That's not my question.
That
I'm
is my
asking
answer to your...
why you don't want people live next to each other regardless of their
I
belief
asked
or
you
religion.
twice.
Wait a minute. When
No,
you were speaking,
not
you didn't
even
let
a
me
second.
talk. And now it's
Not
my
even
turn.
a second. I asked you before, were you finished? And you said yes. I asked that for a reason,
And
knowing
I
that...
emphasized that you got my question or no. You're changing my question.
Sir,
That's not my
I heard
question.
the question. I answered the question the way I answered the question. If you're not happy,
You have a right to
I'll
answer
give you
my
a free
question.
ticket to the Wailing Wall. The fact of the matter is, I heard the question. I'll answer the question the way I answer it. If you don't like it, the next turn around, ask me it again. I am ready to allow the Palestinians... What do you mean, me? If the Palestinians want to call Jordan Palestine, who am I to say no? If they want to call it St. Paul, who am I to say no? If they want to call it Disneyland, who am I to say no? But there's never going to be a Palestine in the land of Israel, and get that straight. You had a chance 1,000 times over. You had your chance, and you didn't want a Palestine. You wanted everything. Well, when you start a war and you lose, I come from Brooklyn, and in the streets, losers lose and winners win, and get that clear. Of course you didn't start the war. Sweden did, yes, sir. The question of... oh, darn it. I can't read that. I'm sorry. The last question was what again?
Well, if you let me make a comment, I was telling you, you changed my question.
No.
No, I asked you
Okay,
why
go
you
ahead,
don't
go.
think about human beings as a human beings, regardless of their religious or belief. I don't want to get to the point who is Jew or who's Muslim, Arab, or anything else. That's not the question.
Yes.
That's not the human life in 20th century.
You're right.
We're not talking about ancient time.
Absolutely.
Okay, then why you start to talk about I want Arab to live by Arab?
It's a pleasure to hear you suddenly talking about peace. How come we didn't hear that from you in 1947?
1947.
In 1966?
Great.
1967?
1947, Moshe Dayan,
It was a rhetorical question. It was rhetorical.
No, just a second.
It was
Why
a
I wanna-
rhetorical question.
Great. I want to tell you why you didn't heard about in 1974. That was the time Moshe Dayan took the cabinet, and the first speech he gave the story about Jewish family, and the story goes something like that. It was an old farmer man living in his old home. Just a second. You start to talk about all those history. I wanted to say one present time. Just listen. And he said, well, he had a goat in his house, and he was putting it outside in the yard. That goat was making noise during the night, and he couldn't get asleep. Day after, that farmer take a goat to this person like him as a rabbi, and told him, well, I have this goat in making noise, and I couldn't get asleep. What should I do? Then the rabbi suggested him, well, tonight take the goat in your room. He did that thing. That night, now the noise was louder and the smell got worse and worse. He saw the problem, it hadn't been solved. He went back again to rabbi and told him the story. Then he said, well, take it back in the first place. He did that thing. And day after he came and appreciated the suggestion of the rabbi. Moshe Dayan started with this story and then said, well, we're going to occupy, say, 100 mile, and the Arab going to be against us, and then we'll release 50 mile. I mean, that was your idea in 1974. Why you accept anybody to talk about the peace? You said the way American or in this country people solve the problem, they sit in the coffee table and the cake and then solve the problem. That's great. And I agree with that. But since, for example, you are one of the side of the Middle East problem, when you have that attitude about the killing, murdering people, how I can sit and talk to you in the coffee table? There is no way. If those Palestinian teenagers, they had a gun, for sure, they're shooting you. But the only thing they have right now is a stone. And yeah, they're going to throw a stone to you until the problem going to be solved.
We'll take the risk. We'll take the risk.
Well, these people living on
My
risk.
friend, listen. You spoke. Let you speak. There are other people waiting for you. I heard what you said. A change of history. An incredible ability to avoid facts and truths. You didn't start the war in 1948. You're right. We did. You're right. You're right. We did. We agreed to disagree. You started 4 wars with us, and you lost, and that's the way it is. You lost, and we win. And Arabs will not be throwing anything in Israel when I'm prime minister because they won't be there. Next question.
You mentioned South Africa only in relation to Nelson Mandela.
Right.
Now, hundreds of thousands of black Africans have been killed by the government of South Africa. And we have evidence that the government of Israel is conniving with the government of South Africa to oppress black Africans. Now, most black African states have established or have normalized their relations with Israel. Why does Israel still continue to participate in the murdering of black Africans?
That's it. In 1973, when Egypt attacked Israel on its holiest day, Yom Kippur, every black African state in Africa cut its ties with Israel. And South Africa didn't. Now, I despise South Africa. I despise their policy. But if you think that we're going to back an African National Congress whose leader embraces a man who wants to wipe out Israel, then you're crazy. So that, you're right, because I would assume that you're not crazy, and therefore I would assume that you know we're not going to back the African National Congress. Why did the black states in 1973 all cut their ties? Why? How come? If you think that we're going to go with people who have shown a bias and hostility in the UN against Israel from 1948, I'm not a fool. We go for our self-interest. The African National Congress took support from communists and from the Soviet Union because they believed that it was to their self-interest. I can of course grasp that. Sir, I haven't finished yet. After I finish,
that was not my question.
So after I finish, you'll speak again. Don't worry. Let you speak. So therefore, if in 1959, when the Algerians were fighting the French, and there's no question that the French were wrong, imperialist, should Israel have backed the Algerians, knowing that if they won, there'll be one more Arab state against Israel? Of course not. I'm not crazy. I despise the government in South Africa. But I'm certainly not going to back anybody who has committed himself to my enemies who would wipe us out. And if that doesn't make you happy, it makes me less happy to see Mandela embrace Arafat.
Please, let me rephrase my question. How does the security of Israel, how can Israel survive with the apartheid system? That's what I don't understand. Why? Why does Israel connive with South Africa to maintain the apartheid system?
First of all, Israel opposes it. Israel has cut trade with them. Israel has cut the arms with them. Had I been there, I would not have done it. You hear me? Not because I like them. I don't like them. But I do what's good for my country, just as you do what's good for your country. So don't be so righteous here. You were taking oil from Arab states who are the leaders in the slave trade of blacks today in the world today. Doesn't that bother you?
Oh, yeah, it does bother me, but I'm talking of the present. What is going on right now?
The fact is, it didn't bother the ANC. It didn't bother them. Because what was good for the ANC, and I understand that. I understand that. They did what was best for them. And so they went into a bed with slave traders because at that moment it was good for the ANC. Well, we learned a great, great lesson. The whole world has been against us for 2,000 years. And we're going to do what's good for us and not what is good for you if that's bad for us.
Well, you still didn't answer my question. Thank you, though.
Yeah.
Yes. What I wanted to know, the couple questions have come up. But one thing is, what struck me as very interesting is you comparing the Middle West with the Middle East. And what I want to know is what's wrong with sitting over a cup of coffee and discussing problems, and what's wrong with compromise? And don't you think that, or I would think that compromise is not only it's practical, but it also seems to me it's a spiritual or ethical. I mean, isn't God in favor of compromise? And the last thing is, I've heard Farrakhan speak, and he reminds me a lot of you. And it's good. I'm glad you spoke out against him and Carmichael and Jackson, and I hope they would speak out against you too, because it seems like you're both on extremist sides. And why does power or feeling? I mean, I'm Jewish, okay, and we've
yes,
been.
I know.
Right. Oh, right. And it just seems that to be strong and committed to me as a person, us as a people, doesn't have to mean to be not non-compromising and just so rigid. I don't think there is strength in being rigid. I think it's weak.
Okay. There's nothing wrong with sitting down over coffee and cake with people that you can sit down with. How come they didn't sit down over coffee and cake with us for 40 years when they thought that they could kill us and win a war? How come? Because when they think that they can win, there's no coffee and cake. When they think that they can't win, except through Jews such as yourself, who is a good Jew, and I say that quickly, and a decent Jew, and a well-meaning Jew, but a naive Jew. They know that you can, only you, and I don't mean you personally, only people who think as you do, only you can help them eventually win, because they can never beat us in a war. I'm ready to sit down with anybody. I have always said we should sit down with Arafat, always, and tell him no. I think that when Jews say there is a difference between Arafat and Hussein, that's a dangerous statement to make. Because then what they're saying is, well, they see there are bad Arabs and then there are good Arabs. Hussein wants exactly what Arafat wants, except he's cleverer. He learned the lesson. If you say nice things about Jews, then they'll toss money at you, or the cyanide. Compromise? We accepted a compromise in 1947, or don't you know? We gave up 80% of our land, or don't you know? How much do you want to compromise? Until Israel is 1 meter by 1 meter? We've done the compromising. And we lost 6,000 Jews in 1948 after that compromise, which was turned down by them. Compromise. I don't compromise with people who have made it clear to me that the land of Israel is Palestine, all of it, and that today they'll go to 1967, then tomorrow to 1947, and then the next day to 007. Compromise. I'm ready to compromise. Land for peace. I'm a great believer in land for peace. I'll keep the land and give them peace. Farrakhan. Why does it bother you that do you think that everything that he says is wrong? Everything? No.
Wrong? No.
When he speaks about strength, do you think that that is so wrong?
No, not at all.
Not at all, right. So don't think that it's wrong if I speak about strength. Farrakhan is a vicious Jew hater, a bad guy, a racist, and the worst. But even the worst says some true things. For decades, for centuries, blacks were treated brutally here. And if the civil rights movement eventually won here, you know why? Because on the one hand, there were the Panthers using violence, and on the other hand, the NAACP ran to President Johnson and said, you see, if we don't get something, they're going to follow the Panthers.
Yeah, sure.
Violence is a terrible thing, but sometimes it's terribly necessary. And that's a very, very sad thing. Don't talk to me about violence. I know what violence is. I've gone to prison for violence. I fought in a war in 1973. I know what violence is. Who wants violence? One has to be crazy to enjoy violence. But one has to be crazier to say, I'll never use violence. You try not to. You try very, very hard not to. And then in the end, if you have to, you kick butt. And that's the Jewish way. Yes?
So one follow-up. So who's the alternative to you? If you don't deal with us, you'll have to deal with Kahane.
I have no idea, but I want to tell you one thing. No one was ever indispensable. Moses died and Joshua popped up. If it's not me, it'll be someone else who was just as clever and normal as I am. Yeah.
All right. First
Yes,
of all,
but louder, please. Into mic.
All right. I just have a statement first and a couple of questions. Earlier, you said that you were for peace, and that doesn't seem possible through violence. How can you achieve peace through violence?
That's first question. How can I achieve peace through violence? In World War II, we violently smashed the Nazis, and voila, there was peace. Every war is waged so that someday it will end in peace. Surprise?
But there's always fighting
Next
somewhere. All right. Thanks. All right. And all right. You said that you can live side by side with them as long as they're in a different country.
Side by side, right.
Why can't you live side by side with them in one country?
Because they think it's their country. There's not one Arab sitting in this room or standing here that doesn't believe that both sides of the green line are really Arab. It is unbelievable that someone comes up with an asinine statement and the asininites clap for him. Unbelievable. People, I came here thinking that this was a real good campus. Come on, really. Academic rating is plummeting rapidly. Plummeting rapidly, people. Go on. I'm sorry, yeah.
All right. I just have one more question, then I'll...
Go on. 1, 2. I don't care.
All right. When will people like you actually be able to live with people side by side next to them in the same house, not in different countries? Whether they're black, white, Jews, Christians, Muslims, it doesn't matter. What difference does it make?
Sir, in my Kahane movement, we have black Jews and we have white Jews and we have all kinds of Jews. So don't give me this here crap about blacks and whites. There is no difference between blacks and whites. Get that clear. I have said it.
I know that. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
So I have said it as clearly as I can say it. Period. Ethiopian Jews, I didn't see the Arabs marching for Ethiopian Jews. We did. And they happened to be a little black. A little.
You still didn't
and
answer
not
my
relevant
question.
either.
What
We
difference
have a
does it
problem
make
with
what
Arabs.
religion you are, what color you are, where you come from?
Go on, talk.
What difference does it make what color you are, what religion you are, or where you come from? You seem to have some big thing about that Arabs should live in an Arab country and Jews should live in Israel.
Yeah.
What difference does it make?
I didn't say that Swedes shouldn't live inside Israel, because Swedes don't claim that Israel is theirs. Arabs don't want to live in Israel. They want to live in Palestine. And they want to take Israel away and call it Palestine. That's why they are not going to live in Israel, which will stay Israel. Can't you grasp that?
I guess not.
Yeah. Well, he did grasp it. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I am from Latin America.
I'm sorry. Louder. I'm sorry.
Being a Latin American student, I am not Jewish, I am not anti-Semitic, but I am really sick and tired of you Jews killing innocent children, innocent Arab children. And every time somebody say the Jews are killing the innocent children, they call that person anti-Semitic. We are not anti-Semitic, we are not anti-Jewish, but we as a human beings, we want to ask you, please stop killing Arab children. And also I am thanking God for Martin Luther King, because he helped us minorities. Okay, don't tell me that the blacks are bad here. For us, they are good.
If you don't want those children killed, tell them to stop throwing firebombs at our soldiers. You don't want them killed? Then elect Rabbi Meir Kahane Prime Minister, and none of them are going to be killed, because then all of them are going to live in Jordan. Where, of course, nobody ever kills Palestinians. Inside Jordan, they never killed Palestinians in Black September 1970. Of course not. No one ever kills Palestinians except Jews. More Palestinians have killed Palestinians than Jews have. Palestinians. Next question.
I have a few questions. I first had a comment. It's interesting. I don't know if it's good to see a lot of people here. I would encourage people who do want to learn more about what's going on to go to some, I shouldn't say more, maybe thoughtful or intelligent dialogues, but differently thoughtful and intelligent, and they're going on all the time around the Twin Cities, and it would be great to see people there and participating.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to read out what has been said. I'm not a rabbi, although I thank God that women can be rabbis now, so I'm not going to quote the Bible, but it seems that to be the one thing that I do remember from my Sunday school is that to be a good Jew, you first have to be a good human being, which I think for most people includes not killing other human beings. I know that sounds kind of simplistic, but it is. And I just wanted to address your point about, again, about living separately. Well, maybe all the Arabs and Palestinians can go live in Jordan. Maybe it would be better if the Jews lived on one side of the world and the Arabs lived on the other. But that's not the way it is. And to tell someone to leave their home and to go somewhere else and then it'll be okay, it's a hard thing. You know, maybe it would be better if my mom and I lived on different sides of the world too, but that's not the way it is. So you deal with what you have in front of you. So I guess I just feel that the only choice, the only non-destructive choice for both Israel and for Palestine, or for Israeli Jews and for Palestinians, is to negotiate, with whether it's over coffee or over cake.
over what issue?
I'm talking...
A rhetorical question. In 1929, in one day in Hebron, which they don't call Hebron, they call Al-Khalil, in one day in 1929, they murdered 67 Jewish men, women, and children. What was bothering them in 1929? Clearly the occupied lands of 1967, right? Of course, certainly. Between 1936 and 1938, there was an intifada. 510 Jews died, murdered. What should we have talked about then when there wasn't even a Jewish state? Where have you been? In 1948, we wanted to sit down with them, and we accepted an insane compromise. And they said no and went to war. Sit down with them and compromise. How easy it is for you to live here, or in Great Neck, or in Greater Neck, or in Greatest Neck, wherever you happen to live, and tell me, let's try to compromise again. Again, I've had it. I've had it. The compromise is that we will be prepared to allow them to live in Jordan, which is really ours. That's a big, big compromise on my part. And hopefully we'll live in peace. Your next point was, the only and I'm quoting you, the only non-destructive choice is to sit with them. The only non-destructive choice. You think that there's one Arab here who would ever give up Jerusalem? Half of it? A quarter of it? What are you going to compromise about? Do you know what they believe? They sincerely believe the country belongs to them. They sincerely believe that. You see that? He helps me. God bless him. Allah. God. And you're sitting and talking because you don't believe the whole land belongs to the Jewish people. That is the difference between an Arab and a Jew, such as yourselves. They really believe the country's theirs, and they can wait 1,000 years for it. And you sit and tell me, who doesn't live in St. Paul or in Great Neck, sit down with them and talk it over with them. I'll sit down with them, but I'll tell them no. I'll sit down with them and work out how we'll help the PLO overthrow Hussein inside Jordan. I'll sit down with them on that. But having started 4 wars with us, with all the Jews that died because of the wars that they began, there is never again going to be land of ours given up to the Arabs. And know that. Yes.
Hi, my name is Matt Haim Cutler, and I'm a member of the Minnesota Israel Public Affairs Committee. You'll see our name. It's one of the ones on the sheet. And we are very much in support of an Israel that is strong and a strong connection between the U.S. and Israel which is a Western-style democracy, and we see no problem with that as a state. And I'd just like to say that I think that the reason the nations of the world that do support Israel, and the reason we support Israel, is because of their strong civil rights record. Name another nation where you have 3,000 people throwing rocks at you and only 21 people are killed, compared with the other nations of the Middle East where Syria paves over the towns where something like that happens. And that's why we support the nation of Israel. And I think that I have to question what will happen when you get in control, and whether or not your civil rights record and whether or not your lack of faith in a Western-style democracy would be the Israel which is today and which is strong and which does deserve to be supported.
Wait. Your first statement was that you back Israel and its Western-style democracy. That's what you said. Let me tell you some things, some laws that Israel has. Not my laws. Israel has a law called Chok HaShvut, law of return. Have you heard of it? You want to tell us what it says?
The law of return states that for any Jew around the world, they have the right to return to Israel and become an Israeli citizen.
That's exactly what it says. Can you imagine a law in this country?
And the Statue of Liberty says we will take your poor, we will take your afflicted. It says we will take anybody. Israel's a small nation. It was created by Jews, so they said they'll take Jews. That's a smaller number. The Statue of Liberty says we'll take anybody. It's a large nation.
You hear that? In other words, because Israel is, a small country, therefore it can limit it to Jews. Know that Israel has a law of return that is limited to Jews and not to non-Jews. If Ben-Gurion had not passed that law in 1950, and when I was in Knesset, I would have presented that as a bill, word for word. Do you know what you would have called me? A racist. Now, that's one law of a Western-style democracy.
It's a religious statement, whether or not you're Jew. It's not a race statement.
My turn, then afterwards yours again. First my turn. Let's keep it cool. Next, another law. No non-Jew in Israel is allowed to purchase state land. Did you know that? Next time you give to the JNF, know it. I didn't pass that law. The law was passed, as you said properly before. It's our only country. There's no way that we are going to give it up to anybody else. But that's not Western-style democracy. That's a Jewish state. And if you can't see a contradiction between that and that, you're either naive, which you're not, or not willing to see, which you're not.
I'd just like to quote your own words back to you. This is the Middle East and not the Middle West, okay? In the Middle West, we can afford to have a democracy that has all of this. And we can afford to sit there and say, we have a democracy that can allow anybody in and deal with it because we're a nation of this size. In the Middle East, you have a different situation. It's the only democracy, but it is a nation that allows freedom of speech. And if you look at it in comparison to the Middle East, you have to say it's the only thing close to a Western democracy. In comparison with some European nations, I'd say it's very much a Western democracy.
What you're saying is that the Middle East is not the Middle West. So you're saying that Western-style democracy is not for Israel. So don't start off by telling me Israel represents Western-style democracy. You have to be logical and intellectual and rational. The fact of the matter is that any non-Jew sitting here who hears you say that says, what do you mean it can't be because it's a small country? And still, it is not the only democracy in the Middle East. Lebanon was as much a democracy until the Arabs got to each other. And the fact is that it is not a Western-style democracy. Israel's Declaration of Independence speaks of a Jewish state. The Constitution does not speak of a Christian state. It is not Western-style democracy. That's what she says. Now, you're not happy with that, right?
No. Well, I would say
I understand that.
England is a Western-style democracy, and in England, they have a state religion, the Anglican Church, and technically all of their laws are based on the idea of the king and queen. But in fact, it functions as a Western-style democracy.
Great Britain does not limit immigration to Christians. Great Britain does not say that state land can only be bought by Christians. So stop playing games here. Now, I am all for those laws. Not because they're racist laws, of course not, but because they ensure the survival of Israel as the Jewish state. And that's not Western democracy. But thank God we have chosen that path, because if ever there's a choice between Western democracy, which means that the Arabs have a right to be the majority through peaceful means and vote Israel out of existence, or Zionism, which says never, I go for Zionism, which says never. Yeah.
Basically, I know how you stand on most of these things, so I won't try to debate.
I'm sorry, louder, please.
I say I know how you stand on most of these things. You pretty much have your adamant views, and you're not going to change them. But my question to you, I have two questions. One is, you say that Israel gave compromise to the Palestinians or Arabs or, whatever you'd like to call them, back in '47. And this was an imposed solution upon the Palestinians, who were the indigenous population at the time. And as you say, they refused to accept this compromise, which was imposed by the UN. Now today, we have a so-called peace process. And many countries in the world, including most of the European Economic Community and most of the world, support a UN supervision or a UN international conference. But Israel rejects this because they do not want an outside imposed solution, compromise. Now what you have here is Israel refusing to have an outside interference from the UN now, and the Palestinians back in '47 refusing to have outside interference imposed on them. So what's the difference?
Oh, great difference. At that time, Israel agreed, hoping that the Arabs would be rational. After 4 wars, it sees that they don't want peace. They've seized upon this compromise now because they can't beat us in war. That's the great difference. If you push me once, and you push me twice, and you push me 3 times and 4 times, and each time I belt you out, don't come to me and say, okay, now I've changed. I don't believe you. I don't believe the Arabs. I don't trust them. And the burden of proof is not upon me. It's upon them who started 4 different wars. That's the difference.
Well, yeah, I think we have a counting problem here because there's been more than 4 wars, and if we exclude the 47-48 war, you know, it's up to an individual to decide who started it. We have the 56 war where Israel invaded the Sinai. They initiated that one. The 67 war, I mean, if you want to call it preemptive or not, they moved first. The 73 war, they didn't start. 78 war, they invaded Lebanon. In 82, they invaded Lebanon. So that's 6 wars. And I don't think that the Arab countries initiated most of those. Yeah. But that's besides the point. My second question is, in the occupied territories, we have, you know, an uprising going on here, and basically political dissension or political, you know, freedom of speech is denied to the Palestinians. As a Palestinian, I mean, I know, I've been there, I know what's going on. And I can see from the Israeli point of view, I know why they want to shut them up. Okay, but that's in that country. But in this country, we have freedom of speech, democracy, and I don't think that JDL wants freedom of speech in this country either. Otherwise, they wouldn't espouse the murder and killing of Palestinian activists in this country where it is allowed to speak freely. My example is Alex Oda in California, who was murdered by JDL members. What do you think about that?
Let me take your first question first, second, and that third. You spoke about the 56 war and 67 wars as Israel having struck first, a preemptive war. You're right. Let me show you what happens when Israel doesn't strike first. In 73, when Israel wanted to strike first, and Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon said no. And they gave in to them. We lost 4,000 soldiers because we gave in to America. If you know that they are planning to hit you, hit them first. Hit them first and save your soldiers' lives. My soldiers are more precious to me than their soldiers. There are no occupied territories. They are liberated territories. Nothing is occupied. I would never be an occupier. There is no freedom there. You're darn right. They're our enemy. They're our enemy. You don't give freedom to your enemies. And secondly, be very, very careful when you say that JDL killed Oded in...
That's what the FBI said.
Excuse me, you said...
FBI, I got my information from the FBI.
Just let me tell you something. That the FBI never said it, because if the FBI had said it, it would have been slapped with a multi-trillion-dollar libel suit. It stated that it has reason to believe. Now, let me, after having said that, I have had no ties with JDO since 1984. I founded it, but in 84, I cut ties with it because I can't live over there and run an organization which is violence-prone here. I think that the killing of the Arab on the West Coast was stupid, was terrible. Nobody benefited from it except the Arabs. It made Jews look bad. You don't do that here. You don't do that here. He wasn't that dangerous. He wasn't that kind of a person. He was pro-PLO. Big deal. If I had, you know, there are an awful lot of people here who are pro-PLO. I thought it was a stupid thing. I thought it was a terrible thing. And I can't say it more clearly than that. Okay?
Well, I don't understand when you say they're a violence-prone organization, which you founded, and so you espouse violence. But when is the right situation to use it? Self-defense. But you say not self-defense, preemptive. Strike your neighbor before him. You know. So
you don't strike at someone who is not dangerous.
Well, who decides who's dangerous and who's not?
Well, clearly, sir. Just as Mandela decides when to throw bombs in South Africa. That clearly does not bother you. And just as Arafat decides when to throw bombs in Israel, and that clearly, certainly doesn't bother you, we'll decide when violence is smart and right and obligatory or wrong and stupid. A Jewish fist has to be attached to a Jewish head. Otherwise it becomes some kind of loose cannon. Yes, sir.
You've talked a lot about history today, and
louder, please.
You've talked a lot about history today and all the atrocities of the past. And when you spoke about returning to Israel, you had a lot of pride in your voice when you talked about your grandchildren.
Yeah.
And them returning to their Holy Land and being able to grow up there. And I'd like to see all the religions, and there are 3 major world religions that are based in Jerusalem, have the opportunity to have that same thing happen. And therefore I challenge you to quit looking at the past and look towards the future.
I'm sure that you know that from 1949 to 1967, Jews were not allowed to go to the Western Wall by the Jordanians. Did that ever bother you? All the faiths should have the right. Every faith has the right today under Israel to practice its faith in Jerusalem. Everyone. Including the asinine move of allowing the Muslims to stay on the Temple Mount, which is our mount. So don't tell me about the other faiths. We allow missionaries inside Israel, which is an insanity. If you want to be a good Christian, God bless you. But leave Jews alone. And we'll leave you alone. We won't convert you. You don't convert us. And you have an absolute right to practice your faith in Jerusalem. Yes?
I should say earlier you spoke about Algeria and France, and how you thought that France was definitely wrong, imperialistic, but you weren't going to support Algeria because it would be another nation against you.
Right.
You spoke about the evils of South Africa and its apartheid, and how you wouldn't, or how all the other nations had cut ties, they didn't. So as a leader of an Israeli government, you would certainly be in league with them. In the 1930s, Adolf Hitler used hatred as a tactic to pull his people together after the shattered, war-torn years of the First World War, and got his country to work, motivated by hatred towards and an extermination policy towards your very race. He did what he had to do. Just like what you say, you do what you have to do to keep your country alive. And what I'm trying to say is it's that same kind of political amorality that has led us to the wars, to Hitler's, to Stalin, to the Khmer Rouge, and yes, maybe even you. I just thought you should think about it.
I was really afraid that after that asinine comment, people would really clap. However, I'm going to answer you. Do you think that the Jews of Germany threatened Germany? Do you think that the Jews of Germany were running around Germany saying, it's really our country, and the Germans took it from us, and when we have power, we're going to take it back and call it Israel? You think that that's what the Jews said? If they had said that, then Hitler would have had every right to deport them, not exterminate them. They didn't say that. The Jews of Germany wanted nothing more than to be the best Germans that ever lived. That's the difference between the Jews of Germany and the Arabs of Israel. They don't want to be Israelis. They don't want to be Jews. They claim that Israel is an illegal state. It's a settler state. It's an imperialist state. And they want to wipe it out. That's the difference. I don't want to exterminate the Arabs. I just want to move them out, and believe me, if I was the prime minister for 1 month, they'd be out. Yes.
I have two questions.
Yes, sir.
The first is, who is Mort?
Sir, hold on.
Excuse me.
Yeah, just hold a second.
Excuse me, please. I'd like to point out that we have 10 more minutes. So.
Yeah.
Okay, the first question is, who is Mort? You've referred to him several times. I'm not familiar with him. The second question is I'd like for you to speak to whites and liberals, especially inability in America to recognize racism among people of color.
Sorry, what?
To speak to whites and liberals, especially's inability to recognize racism in America amongst people of color, and how that affects you in your position, Louis Farrakhan, and other related topics you've been speaking about today.
I don't want to go into Mort. Those that know who he is know. Those that don't, just he's not relevant. He's just a bad guy. That's just forget about it. Now.
Okay.
Wait. Answer the second question. His second question was about why can't liberals and so on recognize anti-Semitism or racism on the part of people of color. Well, okay. The reason is that liberals, and especially Jewish liberals, have a tremendous hang-up and guilt about blacks. Instead of respecting them as human beings and not blacks or greens or anything else, they'll bend over backwards to show you, see, we love you really. And if we love you, maybe you'll love us too. I said before, I'll say it again. All people are really equal, but I mean really equal. If you're good, you're good, and if you're bad, you're bad, whether you're white, black, or polka dot. And anyone who is afraid to get up and condemn blacks for saying the same kind of things that if whites said it, they'd be shrieking, is a bigot and has nothing but contempt for blacks. I'm a great believer in equality. That's why I treat Stokely like I would treat...
We got 5 minutes left. I want to talk to you before I leave. Okay?
Absolutely.
You're a big liar, you know?
Yeah, okay, go on, let's go.
I can tell you what you just said about Israel or whatever. My father was ambassador at Ivory Coast in Israel. I was there, okay? And you say you want to do peace side by side in a different country. This is not right. Okay, I don't know where your country is and where the Jewish country is, but anyway, the land belongs to everybody. So don't stand it out there, you got all the police behind your hand or whatever, and lie there, okay? So that's what I want to tell you. And get to your house here and leave.
All right, that was an interesting statement. Next.
Whites were never enslaved, so don't...
Excuse me. He's next. Go on. Unless you...
Don't say that the people of color are racist against whites. Whites were never slaves. Okay, that's a different point of view.
You're right. You're right. In other words, blacks can never be racist. No question about that. Blacks are not racist. Of course, it's just... In Brooklyn, there is an ongoing boycott of Koreans by blacks. I want to tell you that if whites would be doing that and saying boycott Koreans, can you imagine what you would say? I say the same thing. Don't tell me people are people, white or black, and there are bigots on both sides and of all hues and cries. Yes.
One thing I'd like to talk about history. Someone else here said that they thought they should leave that in the past, but I think that's really vital to this whole discussion, is the history of the Zionist movement. And I think that you should know this or you're going to start swimming, that the Zionist movement was not founded by people who were against sitting down over coffee and cake with the worst anti-Semites in the world. The Zionist movement, including Herzl, was founded by people who were willing to trade the thousands of lives of Jews so that they could be the ruling class of a new state in Palestine. The Zionism not only robbed land from Palestine, but it backed off from the fight against anti-Semitism in Europe. Herzl met with czars in Russia that were instigating pogroms against the Jewish population. They had connections with Mussolini and even indirect connections with Nazi Germany. This is all written about by Jewish authors. I urge all people to read a book called Zionism in the Age of Dictatorship by an American Jew, Lenny Brenner.
That's it? My friend, I'd sit down with the devil to save my people. And it's people like Lenny Brenner, who I know well, too well, who is the epitome of that self-hating Jew. Thank God there were Zionists who created a Jewish state, to which are pouring in now 1 million Soviet Jews. If they didn't have Israel, they have to stay inside the Soviet Union and enjoy the blessings of the anti-Semites there. It doesn't bother me when Arabs cry out against Israel, because I understand them. They believe it's Palestine. I would suspect that you're Jewish. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm Irish.
Okay, fine, good enough, good enough. But the fact is that that Lenny Brenner is Jewish. You haven't ever found one Arab in the world who would ever write a book against Arab Zionism as Lenny Brenner wrote against Jewish Zionism. That's the difference between a normal people and a people that is riddled with sick people like Lenny Brenner. Yes, next.
I had the wonderful opportunity this past year to...
Louder, please. Yeah.
I had an opportunity this past year to study human rights law in Hebrew University on Mount Scopus.
Yes.
And what I'm most worried about is the impression you're giving of the basic legislation that has been passed in the Knesset before you were a member of the Knesset, how you've manipulated that legislation to give people here the impression that the Jewish state supports you, when in fact you were banned from the Knesset and you are not allowed, nor is your party allowed, anywhere near the parliament in Israel.
My dear young woman, I have not given the impression that the Jewish state backs me, whatever that means. What I'm saying is that for someone who is apparently liberal, you show a strange tendency not to be upset at the fact that a legally elected party was banned. Excuse me, I'm still speaking. Had the same Knesset banned a leftist party on the grounds that they advocate soldiers not serve in the territories and therefore pose a threat to a clear and present danger to Israel, you and your friends at Hebrew U would be climbing the walls, and I don't mean the Western Wall. Indeed, had an Arab party, which is openly PLO, that of Meir, had they been banned, you would have climbed 2 walls. Excuse me, I'm not finished yet. And we all know that in a liberal society, one person speaks and not 2 people. You spoke, I was quiet because I am tremendously polite both to men and women. So now it's my turn. Now it's my turn. And afterwards, you can go back there and answer me. But right now I'm speaking. That's called liberalism. Now, if you were really liberal, you would, as Alan Dershowitz did, protest strongly at the outrageous banning of a party elected in a democratic fashion, because that opens the doors tomorrow to banning other parties which you may like, but which I don't like. The banning of the Kahane movement was a tragedy for democracy inside Israel. And therefore, I want you to know, it gave me a great precedent. Because in the end, I'm going to run again. I wasn't banned. The Kahane party was banned. We'll change the name. We'll move the platform around a little bit. It'll be a moving platform. And we'll run. And this, no, because I'm not finished yet. You must learn patience. Don't be an extremist. Really. You must learn patience. You have to learn patience. I will tell you when I'm finished, and then you go back there at the microphone and speak. As long as you want. Because I have patience. Now. I'm going to run again. And if I run, when I run, and when I get the kind of seats which was the reason why I was banned, not for racism, I was banned because the Likud and the right wing and Labor were terrified at what the polls were showing, how many seats I would get. That's why I was banned, and that doesn't even bother you, because liberals are a selective breed par excellence. It all depends on whose ox is being gored. So therefore, when I run and I list a bill to ban the parties that you like and base it upon the precedent of me, I don't want to hear a peep out of you, because after all, I base it upon the precedent that you cheered here. Now go up there and answer me. But they can't hear you.
I can hear her.
But I'm not talking to you. I said they, and you as
let the people decide if they can hear her.
You are not they as yet. Absolutely. The fact of the matter is that the state of Israel doesn't back Shimon Peres either. The state of Israel doesn't back Shamir. The state of Israel doesn't back anybody. There are voters who back particular parties. And that is a fact. Indeed, if you went to Israel, or if Mort went and ran, I think I'd get a lot more votes than either you or Mort. That's for sure. Yes, sir. Now you, hostility unlimited there. Come on, let's go.
Let me first say I've never been in a room where I've seen such hate expressed. I guess I've been a rather lucky American in which I grew up in a small suburb, and I've never found myself in the center of an almost riot. And my comments are not directed to Kahane at all, because I've heard enough of you, and I think everybody here knows what you say on most deals. What I wanted to present this to is the Jewish Information Center that brought him here. This is a relatively peaceful university. We have not, sure, granted it has its violence attempts, but I don't know of many racial incidents or any things that have been caused politically.
Louder, please.
No, that's another thing. It's not directed towards you. You're not going to raise my anger.
I can't hear you.
You want me to shout,
no,
and I'm not going to do that.
I just want to speak into the microphone.
These people can hear me.
Well, I can't hear you, okay?
Well, then get closer to the...
But I can't hear you.
Well, I can hear myself, and I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to them.
If you're talking to them, you won't speak. You're up there to speak to me, and they can listen too.
As I was saying, that I would like to know what you think now that you have brought him to our university, now that we have students here who have seen an almost riot start. And I mean, and the end result here is we have a university student. I mean, I don't know your name on the right. You did say that you saw the pro-Palestine students start the violence. What I saw was Meir Kahane push her. And now excuse me, ma'am. Look,
an
in America,
unbiased witness right over there.
Can I
in the
finish?
kafia? Yes.
Question. I can answer your question. I understand what you're saying. I know what you're getting at. He pushed the person who was up here.
Thank you for saying that.
That flag.
That's right. Nobody gets up here when I'm speaking.
Well, okay. That's
You're in
his
America.
Opinion. Wait, hold on a second. Excuse me.
Go on.
Finish
speaking.
That's his opinion. My opinion of the situation here was when they brought the PLO flag up here, to me that didn't mean equal rights. To me that meant anti-Semitism. It meant the destruction of the Israeli state and the traditional use of the word anti-Semitism. Okay, anti-Jewishness. The PLO to me represents an anti-Semitic organization. It represents an anti-Zionist, so that's obvious. But most importantly, it symbolizes an anti-Jewish organization. Clearly, if you look at the PLO statements, it's not just, we want our state, you can have your state. It's the vilification of the Jewish people and the Jewish religion. So when that flag was up on the stage, I would consider that a provocation, just like if Meir Kahane was a African American speaker, if someone came up wearing a sheet and a white hat and said, I just want to speak my piece.
It's unfortunate that you interpret politics to be behind that, because politics aside, what they were practicing was their First Amendment rights. They were not being violent.
I understand that, and if a KKK member got up on this stage, I don't think I would criticize any black person.
I would hope that they would be escorted. I would hope they'd be escorted off this stage instead of him being allowed by the police to push her violently. And now the end result is she's had her civil rights violated. She's afraid to prosecute against him because she fears she'll end up like Californians that have been murdered by the JDL. And I want to know what right you think you have to bring this type of violence from a man who's preached
I
violence,
haven't heard any violence from him. I haven't heard any racism
chance
from him.
possible. What right do you have to bring this to our university?
The only racism I've heard, or bigotry that I've heard from Rabbi Kahane, is simply that it is his opinion that Arabs don't want Israel to exist. And the pro-Arab people in this crowd have made that clearer to me than has ever been made before. So I don't see the racism. I mean, I've heard him speak before where I've heard racism, but as far as today goes, I haven't heard any racism or any advocation of violence.
He's a violent man. He demonstrated that on our stage. What right do you have to bring this to our university campus?
I'd like to bring up the KKK example again. Yes, he did act violently.
It's irrelevant. He's here now, not the KKK.
Okay. That was a very moving statement. Go on. Next.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
As for racism, you are not a racist. That is your point of view, the stand you take. Yes?
I'm not a racist, right?
Arabs are human beings, Jews are human beings.
Right.
So, how then can you argue from the point of view, from the underlying racist assumptions that Jews have certain rights to the land that Arabs have, that Palestinians have? It's the same land, people were born, same place. How can you say that you're not racist, yet advocate that argument?
For the simple reason that they don't believe that we have the right to the land. It's that simple. Short answer? Pithy. That's it. Did it penetrate?
No, it didn't. That's
Freshmen always have problems. Now.
I'm not a freshman.
Oh, sophomores are even worse.
Not a sophomore either. I'm not a bigot either.
That's really a joke. That is really a joke. I have a very, very great sense of humor.
I have the dubious distinction, I guess, of being the last questioner.
Go on.
From my understanding of the way you think of Israel, Israel is the Jewish state. Its very definition comes from Judaism, this religion that is the justification for its existence. You said a few moments ago that you would make a deal with the devil to preserve that state. Tell me how. Isn't that hypocrisy? Don't you destroy your justification by making a deal with the devil?
My friend, I see that when I come to this campus, it's so square, I can't use metaphors, okay? I take it back. I'll make a deal with a lot of bad people in order to survive. I would venture to say, excuse me.
Go ahead.
In 1948, no country would sell the Jews weapons. And as the time approached for the state to come into being, and the British were turning over tanks to the Arabs, and we didn't have one tank and one bomber, suddenly Joseph Stalin decided to allow Czechoslovakia to sell weapons to Israel, to the Jews. I would take weapons from Joseph Stalin in order to survive. And I hope that you, in your survival, if that's threatened, you would have also. I don't like Stalin. Couldn't stand Stalin. A loser, a slob. But if he's the only guy that throws out that life raft to me, I'll take the raft.
No, I would not, because as a Muslim,
yeah, okay.
I believe
I understand that
my convictions are more important, and that if I die doing the right thing... Well, can I finish my statement, sir, please?
Okay.
Thank
Fine,
you.
good enough. I accept that.
If I die doing the right thing, which God has told me is the right thing...
Absolutely. Okay.
Then what could be better than that? I would rather die in the way of God than make a deal with the devil. I would never make a deal with Joseph Stalin.
I hope that someday you're never in that position.
I certainly hope so too, but if the opportunity comes, I have no doubt that I will stand by my convictions and not be a hypocrite.
I heard you. There is nothing wrong with saving one's soul and saving one's life by taking weapons from a Joseph Stalin. We didn't give anything for it except money. And that saved Jewish lives. And how easy it is for you, a pompous little kid who has never had that experience of facing death, babbling away over here about what is ethical and what is moral.
What is ethical and what is moral remains that way, irregardless of my maturity or your immaturity.
And what is ethical and what is moral in Judaism is a lot different than what you think.
No, it isn't, because Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all come from the same root. There is no God but God, and that is eternal. And those ethics and truths will remain.
Judaism is a set of laws which you don't know, which you've never studied.
However,
and you've never studied. So don't tell me what Judaism is and what it says. It is far more than there is one God. Of course, that's a basic thing.
That is the root.
But there are laws on how a person lives. True. And one of it is, if one comes to slay you, zap him first. You don't like that.
No, but certainly. I approve of that.
You approve of that. Fine, okay.
But on the other hand,
if
Satan comes
and if I don't have the weapon in which to zap him, except from Joseph Stalin, I'll take it from him too. All right.
So you would become what you detest.
We agree to disagree, okay?
You'd become Satan. I mean, you detest Satan, you'd become Satan.
Judaism permits that, okay?
Judaism permits you to be evil, to be good. It's an interesting hypocrisy. I don't think any Judaism would allow you to become evil, to remain Jewish, because you would no longer be Jewish. You would no longer be holy.
If you want to study Judaism, do so. But don't tell me what it says when you don't know what it says.
I guess we'll have to agree to disagree then.
Well, all right, good enough. Okay. Yes?
Good afternoon, Rabbi. Good afternoon, Rabbi.
Good afternoon.
I'm a little concerned about your soul because whether or not God might approve of your politics, I think that God doesn't approve of you stirring up hate in the auditorium.
Louder, really, I can't hear you.
I say that whether or not God approves of your politics, I don't think that God would approve of you stirring up hate this way. And so, other than that, that's the point on which I disagree with you.
Okay, good enough. Thank you for coming, and that's that. Thank you. Shalom.
Do we have time for another question? I'd like to ask a question that rises out of the advertisement that was run before this meeting. It says, the state of Israel is not a political creation, it is a religious one. And I'd like to understand further in just what sense it is a religious creation. Does it rest on some specific instantiation of the Jewish faith? For example, in the book of Deuteronomy, there's a covenant that's given through Moses. It has a set of stipulations. People have to observe them to live in the land. Would that be part of your concept of a religious establishment, or does it have anything to do with Moses and the covenant? Is it something different?
I'm an Orthodox rabbi, and my personal claim to Israel is based upon the fact that God gave us that land. That does not mean that the other arguments, one, the argument of history and historical argument that we lived there for thousands of years until driven out, is not accurate. It is too. Certainly it is. It doesn't mean that a third argument that we have no place to live in this entire world except that land in which we once lived. And our choice is either Israel or another Auschwitz. That doesn't mean that doesn't. In the Bible, it speaks of Ishmael having been a son of Abraham. And what it says in that same chapter in Genesis 17 is that God tells Abraham, and I have heard you, and I will make Ishmael also a great nation, and 12 princes shall come forth from him, but the covenant I will give unto Isaac. And that's what it says. And if you want to be consistent, you have to be consistent with that Bible totally or not. Thank you.